Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for this timely and important presentation on immigration rights and racial justice. Let me give you a few housekeeping rules first. If you only want to view the speaker, you can go to speaker view on the top right-hand side of your screen. And at any time, you will be able to ask questions by typing into the chat tab at the bottom of your screen. You may not be able to see your question, but our administrator will receive it and will present it to the panelists at the end of the program. And the panelists will attempt to answer as many questions as possible, but they may not get to all of them. So please don't be upset if they don't answer your particular question. As for me, I'm your moderator. My name is Shahir Shay Hansen, and I will be your moderator. Just briefly about me, I was born in Mashhad, Iran, grew up in London, England, and then moved to the US. I've been an attorney for 29 years, and my current practice consists of representing criminal defendants on appeal in California. Now, before I introduce our panelists, please bear in mind that the statements and opinions expressed during this presentation are those of the particular speaker or panelist and not of the organizations that are kindly sponsoring this discussion. And on that note, thank you to our sponsors, Professional Organization of Iranian Americans, Persian Cultural Center of Atlanta, Persian Cultural Center of San Diego, and the Racism Awareness Project. Okay, let's get started. Is Liliana Bakhtiari here or Amir Farokhi
Yes,
here?
I'm here.
Liliana? Okay, great. Well, let me first introduce you to Liliana, who's gonna take a minute or two to talk about her run for the Atlanta City Council. Very exciting. Now, you've spent a career tackling issues of refugee resettlement, environmental justice, and career training with orphans and human trafficking victims across the globe. That's amazing work. Tell us a bit about yourself.
So my father escaped here in 82 from Iran, and he raised me in public service, given that, he is Muslim, and that's a very big part of everything that he believes in. He still has his pharmacy in downtown Atlanta, but he very much started, raised me to be very engaged. I think I started volunteering when I was about 5, and he started taking me to marches when I was about 8. We worked in everything from refugee resettlement to volunteering in shelters to helping him work in the pharmacy on weekends. But when I turned 18 and ended up going to Georgia State, I started doing a lot of my own work within the city. Everything from working with the American Friends Service Committee, which was an organization that I started my freshman year of college, and worked in crisis relief issues with them. And when I turned 20, I started doing that internationally. I've worked in 26 countries around the globe now, and have worked in everything from working in women and children's health to working, like you said, in refugee resettlement, environmental justice in parts of Central and South America. I have done extensive work with survivors of genocide and war victims throughout Southeast Asia. And I ended up coming back to Atlanta and doing this work here because every time I would come back home, I would find living conditions in my backyard that I had found abroad. People that were living in homes without running water. They were, we had 6-7 figure homes going up in the neighborhood when you still had people who were on fixed incomes and not able to afford rent or anything else, living, block away. So when the Muslim ban happened back in 2016, 2017, I really felt like there was no way to protect my family. And the realization, I think, in that moment was, if we don't have a strong local government, then everything that's going to come down federally will end up impacting me, like my family, our most vulnerable individuals that live in the city, that live everywhere. It would end up impacting them in negative ways if we didn't have a strong local government. And I saw a great deal of apathy and people not getting engaged. So I decided to run for city council in 2017. I did not know what I would be starting. It ended up being a very, very successful run. And we actually had the highest turnout of first-time voters in the district that year. And I came within 247 votes of winning against a 16-year incumbent. And all the issues I ran on last time actually have only gotten worse over the last 4 years. So I decided to jump in it again, which is why I'm running this year. To make it very clear, I am not running against Amir. I would never do that. I love him.
You're in different districts, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I do believe that we would be the first city where to have two Iranian people on serving on the same government, on the same committee.
Well, we're both very proud of that there are two Iranian Americans so civically engaged in the political system also. Is there anything else you would like to say, Liliana?
Just that I'm really honored that I had the opportunity to come and speak to everyone. I didn't have the same opportunity in 2017 to connect with the Iranian community the way that I wanted to. And I think it's extremely important to connect with people that you share your community with. For me, my dad, there was always this culture in our family, keep your head down, work hard, and do what is needed to succeed. And this idea of, I remember the first time I ran, he asked me why I was doing that to myself. He's very supportive and I love him very much. But to him, it was like, why would you draw this attention? To them, my parents, it was like, this felt very dangerous to them in a lot of ways. And I think breaking that narrative of our stories being important, where I come from being important, sharing that, humanizing it, giving it relatability, teaching people about where I come from, where my family comes from, and being very proud of that. And also just my cousins and my family have never gotten involved in local government. And I can't even, if that's the case with my family, then I'm sure it's the case with a lot of other Iranian and immigrant families. So,
all right. That's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much for setting that example. And really, really wonderful having you with us today.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so is Amir is not here, correct? Okay. So let's move on. We have someone who's doing something extremely interesting with us. Kosar Gohari is currently in Atlanta, having started out on a freedom ride from Washington, D.C. Kosar, welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing?
Sure. Hi, everyone, and thank you. Thank you, Hushajan, for giving me this opportunity to introduce our project. I really wanted to do this trip many, many years ago, but this year, last year actually, after George Floyd was killed in Minnesota and all the protests after this incident, we were closely watching the news, and I noticed that there were, I really knew that there were a lot of sort of misinformation and maybe lack of knowledge about the history and other communities within Iranian American community. But this dynamic, these circumstances, last summer, I noticed there were lots of questions asked within Farsi-speaking communities. There were a bit of a confusion, or maybe, or again, not understanding why there was such a widespread protest, why there was such anger and frustration in protesters and all. So, and I decided to work on an itinerary based on the Freedom Riders trip back in 1961. This year is actually the 60th anniversary of the first Freedom Ride. And then travel from Washington, D.C. to South Mississippi, and then go to Arkansas and Tennessee. And then during this trip, publish a Persian podcast talking about the story of Freedom Riders, and also connecting the history to the current issues in both in African American communities and also in Iranian American communities. So we spent last, 2 nights. First night in Greensboro, North Carolina, where like a major civil rights campaign happened back in 60s, launch counter sitting. And last night we arrived in Atlanta. And then on this coming week, we go to Alabama and Mississippi. And then in like 10 days, we'll be back in Washington, D.C.
Wonderful. Congratulations. Well done for doing that. And so your podcast, it's called Freedom Riders Persian Podcast. And will people be easily able to find it if they want to hear from you?
Yes, the podcast is accessible through all the podcast platforms such as iTunes, Castbox, and also YouTube. And also, and then podcast has an Instagram page, Freedom Riders Persian Podcast, same handle name. You can see our videos and our stories, pictures in the Instagram.
It's in Farsi, correct?
Yes, Farsi? Mostly in Farsi. At this point, at this phase, we are aiming to basically publish these stories for Farsi-speaking sort of audience. But if things go well, we might sort of expand it, hopefully, for our next project.
That would be great. Thank you so much for doing this. It's wonderful what you're doing, and good luck to you.
Thank you very much.
Good luck to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay. Let me just see. I don't think that Amir Farrohi is going to join us, but I would just like to say really quickly that he's also running for re-election to the Atlanta City Council, and he's had a very interesting and amazing career. Also, he was the first Iranian American elected to public office in the American South. That was in 2017. So that's something to be proud of. And he is a lawyer and social activist who currently works for CARE. Okay, now I'm going to introduce you to two speakers. The first one is Houshiyar Afsarzadeh. He is the co-founder of the Racism Awareness Project, which started in 2017. Since that time, the project has had several programs, has hosted several programs via Zoom focusing on the Black Lives Matter movement and the American-Iranian community, and on civic engagement and voter suppression, and a series of lectures on U.S. history from 1492 to the Civil Rights Movement. Houshiyar has also written several excellent articles in Paik magazine on topics ranging from the BLM movement vis-a-vis the Iranian American community, the Supreme Court, the Electoral College, and most recently on immigration rights and racial justice, which is the focus of today's discussion. After Houshiyar has given us his talk, his presentation, we will hear from the exceptionally brilliant trailblazer, Azadeh Shashani. She is the legal and advocacy director at Project South. She's worked a number of years in the US South to protect and defend immigrants and Muslim, Middle Eastern, and South Asian communities. She previously served, and this is incredible. This is why I call her a trailblazer. She previously served as president of the National Lawyers Guild and as National Security Immigrants Rights Project Director with the ACLU of Georgia. Azadeh serves on the Advisory Council of the American Association of Jurists and on the Board of Directors of Defending Rights and Dissent. She is also the author or editor of several human rights reports, including a 2017 report titled Imprisoned Justice Inside 2 Georgia Immigration Detention Centers, as well as many law review articles and book chapters focusing on Muslim Americans. Her writings have appeared in The Guardian, The Nation, MSNBC, USA Today, Al Jazeera, and HuffPost, among others. So it is really an honor to have Azadeh here with us. So take it away, Hushia, and then Azadeh will follow you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Shay. Administrator, could you please enable sharing the screen so I could share my slides? So let me start by thanking everyone who has helped organize this program, especially Shay, and thanks for the introduction. And then I also wanted to thank Puya and Persian Cultural Centers of Atlanta and San Diego for all their support through the years. And make sure I start my own timer too. And I'm honored to be on the same panel with Shay and Azadeh. Azadeh is an amazing, award-winning activist and attorney, and who is highly respected in the progressive community across the US. And we should all be very proud that we have someone like Azadeh in our community. So the key question that I want to address today is there a correlation between rights of immigrant rights, and racial justice? If there is a correlation, is it a direct correlation, or meaning that, you know, if they both move up together and then they both move down together, or maybe it's an indirect? Some people would like it to be indirect. And does that answer to that question have any implications for us as members of the Iranian American community? And so I always like to start with a historical approach. So that's how we're going to start. And let's start with the United States Constitution. That's always where I go back to. So the first 7 articles of US Constitution, which was ratified in 1789, basically said that in Article 1, Section 8, that Congress shall have power to establish a uniform rule of naturalization. That's the only thing it said about immigrants, the original basically 7 articles, and that was said in Article 1. And accordingly, the notion of who could become a US citizen was first addressed in the Nationalization Act of 1790, and then 1795, 1798, and 1802. But that is all the US Constitution said. And US Constitution also did not say much about citizenship. Only because when you get naturalized, you have to also find out, okay, so what are your rights as a citizen? The only thing it said, briefly, it said that basically the citizens of each state shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of citizens of the other states or several states. And so it basically shifted the responsibility of defining citizens' rights all the way to the states. And in fact, even Eric Foner, who is a prominent historian of Colombia, speaks that up until 1865 and end of the Civil War, basically the Constitution and the language seems to suggest the rights of citizens are determined by the states. And then they actually see kind of a reversal. And even the first 10 amendments, known as Bill of Rights, were first actually only intended to protect the rights of citizens of states against infringement by the federal government. All right, so let's go further down. And now let's look at what happened between the Constitution all the way to the start of Civil War. And this is a very interesting era. As I said, the 1790, as Congress had actually asked, in 1790, the first Congress passed the first basically act, the Nationalization Act of 1790. And without any basically beating around the bush, it said the naturalization is limited to a free white person, and then later down of good character. So basically, it said white people, and it also meant obviously white European people. And it is important to note that actually immigrants of all various ethnicities also lived in the country. Obviously, enslaved African people were kidnapped and shipped at this time to this country under horrible conditions. Yet even free blacks and all other non-whites could not become US citizens. And free blacks were actually quasi-citizens. So in 9 out of 13 original states, for example, they could not even vote. This actually didn't improve much because by the time we got to the Civil War in 1861, in actually 29 out of 34 states then, free blacks could not vote. So in a sense, they were not really considered citizens. And as a matter of fact, one major thing that happened during this time was the Dred Scott decision. Dred Scott was a slave who actually sued his master and took it all the way. And this is a really interesting thing because black people actually fought for their rights all the time. Unlike the master narrative that suggests that slaves were part of the family and very obedient. No, they actually started fighting for their rights from the moment the shock of and trauma of that kidnapping and that horrible trip was over. And if they survived it, from that, the moment the shock was over, they started fighting. And Dred Scott took it all the way to Supreme Court and lost. And this is Chief Justice Taney, and who actually read the 7-2 decision. Basically, this ended any hope in 1857 of Supreme Court somehow declaring slavery illegal. As a matter of fact, the decision not only in a sense said slavery in a sense is constitutional, it said actually blacks, regardless of whether they're free or enslaved, they're actually, they're not citizens. So that's what we have. It is not an accident that this is happening at the same time in California. There was actually an 1854 ruling of what is actually known as the People versus Hall. And it basically said that in a case of appeal of, it basically was about an appeal of a murder case in 1850s. And then the California Supreme Court established that Chinese Americans and Chinese immigrants had no rights to testify against white citizens. So they now are going in parallel, and it's very clear. So I gave you those two examples before the war, so you have a clear idea of what we are talking about. There are other things that have happened. Of course, not only enslaved people could not vote as citizens, we have to remember that women could not vote either. In sporadic cases, for example, up until 1807, women could vote in New Jersey. That's only one state. In 1838, Kentucky allowed widows with school-age children to vote. That's kind of odd, but anyways, and then Kansas also allowed that in 1861. So 2 states by the time of 1861, because women were half of the population. And okay, so keep this in mind that so up to this point, not only becoming a citizen is for white people, but also of good character. The key right of citizenship, and that is the right to vote, is limited to white men. Keep this in mind because I'm going to talk about the rights to vote in the end. All right, so, and then what happens after the Civil War ends? So in 1865, the war ends with the victory of the North. 250,000 freed and slaves actually fought on the side of the North and were critical actually also in shifting the balance and to the North, so North could win. And then 3 of the most groundbreaking amendments to the US Constitution are passed, 13th, 14th, and 15th. And these amendments were so profound in shifting the US Constitution toward the rights of citizens and also equality in that era, that basically someone coined the phrase second founding. And it actually, that also the title of a book that Eric Foner, excellent book that he just published. And and here's an interesting point. The person who actually coined that term was Senator Carl Schurz, S-C-H-U-R-Z, sorry if I had a bad pronunciation there. And he later actually became the Interior Secretary, and he actually coined the term. So immigrants actually were participating in this. He fought in the war. He became a general of the Union Army, and he was at Gettysburg, one of the most famous battles of the war. And then, okay, so what is second founding? The 13th, 14th, and 15th. A simplistic view basically says 13th Amendment made slavery illegal, 14th Amendment made Black citizens, and 15th Amendment gave Blacks, freed Blacks, all Blacks, basically, the right to vote. This is true, but it's very limited because it's a lot more than that. So let me quickly talk about what I mean there when I say it's a lot more than that. The 13th Amendment not only made slavery illegal, it also banned involuntary solitude. And that directly impacted millions of future immigrants because they were brought, many of them, as indentured servants. Basically, they had a contract, they were like a slave until their contract was over. And then the 14th Amendment not only granted citizenship to Blacks, it actually brought forth the idea of birthright citizenship for the first time in the world, first country in the world that actually said anyone born in this land is considered a citizen automatically. And it also basically phrased the notion of equal protection under the law, including the right to life, liberty, and property and due process for, very important, any person. It didn't say just citizens, any person, including, so you could actually go argue that illegal aliens actually are protected under the US law because that's what the 14th Amendment said. And and then finally, the 15th Amendment provided the right to vote for all citizens. This is, again, very important. Regardless of their race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So if you were an indentured servant before, you could still vote. And so this, again, impacted immigrants. In fact, there were actually legislations that were being discussed because this was a fascinating era in the history of the United States, a truly revolutionary, transformational era. And radical Republicans were very progressive at that time. And radical Republicans, Lincoln was a Republican, were actually had ideas of a much more inclusive 15th Amendment, including women. And not only that, they also had ideas about having a positive verbiage that says everyone is included. And whatever country you come from, whatever race you are, whatever color you are, whatever religion you are, but those inclusive ones, unfortunately, did not make it through the committee and were not ratified. Even though the 15th Amendment was still unbelievably radical, considering the fact that 4 years earlier, the country had 4 years earlier, the country had 4 million slaves. And so this is really, look at this list on the bottom right, where my cursor is. Look at this is a cartoon by James Nast. So remember the name James Nast. He's a very progressive cartoonist at this point, and as Carl Schurz was. And look, this is called Uncle Sam's Thanksgiving dinner. Look around the table, from African Americans to women to Chinese Americans to Native Americans, everyone is included. Black women, everyone is included. So this is, it just tells you that during this time, we had a fascinating transformational discussions. But then what happened? Unfortunately, second founding as we say, many people actually continue to say, and I agree with that, that we're still in progress. It has not been fully really realized. And so what happened? Why do we say that it's still a work in progress? Okay, so we get to what happened was that, unfortunately, racism and white supremacy as the most terrible legacy of slavery continued to live on. When Reconstruction ended abruptly in 1877, there was, unfortunately, many of the white liberals, moderate Republicans of the North, basically left the scene and decided that they were done, and there was no reason for them to really strive for rights of African Americans. And as a result, we had basically a restoration of white terror in the South. And by the way, both Mr. Shores and James Nast, who was the cartoonist, also joined this fray, even though they were not openly racist, but they basically both, well, James Nast actually drew a cartoon that was racist because it actually showed Black congressmen or legislators, state legislators, because there were Black congressmen back then and Black legislatures, even in South Carolina, they had majority, showed them as buffoons and very corrupt and fraudsters and so on and so forth. So as a result, it only took a couple decades that basically with the Mississippi Plan of 1890, a new system of racial and social control was, in a sense, established in the country, known as Jim Crow segregation. And then, so what happened to immigrants during this time? What happened to immigrants was that, well, the continuation, unfortunately, of anti-immigrant laws. Specifically, 1875, we had the Page Act against the women. It was actually misogyny and anti-immigration at the same time, pretending that basically Chinese women, against Chinese women, that banned Chinese women in immigration to the US. And then in 1882, you had the Chinese Exclusion Act, openly racist. So these are racist cartoons. And then this is an attack in Denver in 1880. And then you had the convict leasing, slavery under another name. I'm not going to get into that. I have other lectures on that and other articles. Please, you can go back and read them. And there's a lot of information on this. And then, of course, the terror of lynching in the South that continued until the Civil Rights Movement. You see, under this big lie of separate but equal, which was separate but anything but equal. And so what was going on with immigration legislations at the same time? Very similar. So, and I'll get into that. But before I get into that, I want to actually talk about the Placey versus Ferguson. This was again another Supreme Court ruling in 1896 that basically put a stamp on segregation laws and segregation all over the country. And it wasn't just the South. In the South, it was actually in the Constitution of the states. 40 states had segregationist laws. California, that claims to be very progressive these days, had 17 of them. And the last basically miscegenation legislation in California was 1947. So so it impacted everywhere and impacted miscegenation. Basically, miscegenation laws in California and many of the states really impacted immigration because they talked about marrying Chinese, marriage between a white man and a Chinese woman was illegal. Marriage between a Japanese woman and a white man was illegal. And then basically the immigration bills that were passed, I'll talk about them. But let's go back to this gentleman. Who's this gentleman? His name is Homer Placey. And Homer Placey is Placey in that in Placey versus Ferguson, which basically it started by him showing up in a railroad car in Louisiana. And when he sat down, he said to the conductor, this was all planned because they wanted this case to go to Supreme Court, the progressive people. He said to the conductor that, by the way, I'm 1/8 Black. Look at him, he's completely white. And remember this because I want to talk about it at the end. And so they removed him because he said that, even though he could pass as white, he's only 1/8 Black. And then the case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court ruled in against Placey and for the state of Louisiana and put a stamp on segregation. So passing as white, remember this because I want to talk about this, because in our community, passing as white is something that is very popular. And I want to talk about that at the end because that's a big lesson there. And then Immigration Act of 1921, Immigration Acts of 1921 and 1924 were horrible. The Immigration Act, this is at the same time that Jim Crow segregation is going. You see the same thing over there, that in 1920, basically in 1924, the Immigration Act included an Asian Exclusion Act again and barred not only Chinese, but all Asians. Very good. So not only Chinese, but all Asians. The law was pro-Northwest European and even limited Italians, Greeks, Asians, East Europeans, including Jewish people from the region. And in 1952, for the first time, they started to kind of mildly move away from that, but not really, because they gave like quotas of 100 each to Asian countries that had most of the population on Earth. And Northwest Europeans and overall white Europeans had the biggest quotas. So the racial quota was still there. And then during the Hoover administration, what we saw was horrible because in 1931, actually, or in 1932, this is in 2018 Washington Post article, they basically rounded up 1 million Mexican Americans who were US citizens born in the United States, and they deported them. Why do I say this? Because now we're getting to a point that actual legal immigrants born in this country are deported. And then what happens? So during the FDR administration, that actually is supposedly progressive and New Deal, that African Americans really didn't get any benefits out of, and it was aimed to a great extent as white working class. Basically, FDR issued 9066 executive order and sent over 110,000 Japanese Americans to internment camps until the end of the war, after they started the war with Japan and Pearl Harbor, which is a horrible, horrible, shameful part of US history. So that tells you that there were second and third generation Japanese Americans in these camps. There were cases that a second generation Japanese woman was pregnant in the camp while her husband was fighting for the US in the Second World War. This is how bad it was. All right. And then comes civil rights movement and what happens there. So because we want to see if there's a correlation. And starting with 1954, so Brown versus Board of Education starts the amazing Civil War, right? And it's peaceful, but in a way, but it's also bloody because the demonstrations are peaceful, but police and white segregationists and KKK are very violent. And then it results in the 1964 Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Act, sorry. And then 1965 Voting Rights Act is signed in August. This is Martin Luther King Jr. and then President Johnson. And then Immigration Act of 1965 is signed, sorry. And the Immigration Act of 1965 basically ushers a whole new era because for the first time, this act basically completely changes, not only makes the whole racial quota thing illegal, and President Johnson even says that that was all un-American. It actually goes based on 75% family relationship, like 20% based on work and background of education and work visas, and then 5% based on refugees. And if you really think about it, our Iranian American community today would not be of this size and influence if it wasn't for that act. So we directly actually benefited from the Voting Rights Act. I'm going to quickly go through what happened after that. So some people call the civil rights movement the third founding, because the second founding was not completely successful, unfortunately, because the issue of economic justice was never attacked. Same thing happened with the third founding and civil rights movement. Because the economic justice issues remained unsolved, and Martin Luther King was actually assassinated in 1968 because he had actually started being against the Vietnam War in 1967 speech, and he was in the process of actually the poor man's war. And right after the disintegration of the coalition of anti-war movement and civil rights movement, we see the rise of a whole new system of racial and social control called mass incarceration. Sorry about that. And now mass deportation. That's a term coined by Michelle Alexander. I recommend her book under the name is The New Jim Crow. And in her latest article, actually in January of 2020, she started to coin the notion of mass deportation, that's saying that this mutation of this unfortunate system of racial and social control now is mass incarceration, mass deportation. Okay, so and then it is no surprise that in 2015, Donald Trump walks down that elevator in Trump Tower and starts his campaign. After all this, starts his campaign with racist, basically monologue against Mexican Americans, calling all of them rapists. And then I just want to say, what is the lesson learned? First and foremost, I think we have established that overall there is a direct correlation. I mean, I've given you a lot of historical facts. I have actually not given you a lot of it because there was no time. There is a direct correlation. When racial justice in the United States actually goes up, the same thing happens with immigrants' rights. Never forget, with one executive order like the Muslim ban and the 9066 by FDR, it could really impact our future. This is a picture of Iranians who went skiing in 2020, in January of 2020, and were stopped when they were coming back. American citizens coming back from ski trip in Canada. Okay, I end with the Homer Placey lesson. Our lesson is, what do we do as Iranian Americans? We stand for racial justice because this is our rights too. If we don't, remember Homer Placey? He actually looked even more white than many of us. And when he told them that he was 1/8 Black, they actually removed him. They really don't care what we try to pass as eventually. If we have a white supremacist and white nationalist government, our immigrant rights, even if you're a US citizen, regardless of what generation we are, will be impacted. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hushiarjan. That was fascinating. Okay, Azadeh, please start.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me. Hi, everyone. Salam be hamegi. I wanted to give a special thanks to Hushiar for the invitation and for organizing, and to Shaqaiq for moderating the discussion and for the kind introduction. So I serve as legal and advocacy director at Project South. And first, before I start, I would like to extend my solidarity to Asian American communities in Atlanta and across the country in light of the horrific attacks in Atlanta and increasing hate attacks targeting Asian Americans. We stand with Asian American communities and determined as ever to work together to dismantle white supremacy. So Project South, the organization that I work with, is a social justice organization based in Atlanta, working in support of grassroots organizations and Black, brown, immigrants, undocumented, and Muslim communities in the US South, as well as in solidarity with Black and indigenous communities in the global South, from Haiti to Palestine. We work on various areas, such as immigration detention, local police, ending local police collusion with ICE, which stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement, defending and protecting Muslim and Middle Eastern communities against the state surveillance and repression, and ensuring that undocumented people have access to fundamental rights, such as utilities and higher education. We are part of a movement that believes systemic state violence is not to be tolerated in any form, whether it is ICE caging and harming immigrants or cops murdering Black people in the street with impunity. So I'm going to focus my talk on immigration detention, specifically the conditions at Georgia immigration detention centers. But if there's any time during the question and answer, I'm happy to talk about other areas of our work. You know, for people on social media, we are on Twitter at Project South, so feel free to take a look at you know, what we share and the various areas of our work there as well. There are two specific immigration detention centers in Georgia that I wanted to talk about. One is the Irving County Detention Center, which made news in September. And beyond, some of y'all may remember, it you know, brought national and international attention to the conditions at Georgia facilities. The issue of forced sterilizations against immigrant women. So, and that was based on the complaint that we filed, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. So we have documented conditions at the Irving County Detention Center, which is an immigration detention center for many years. And the treatment of immigrants at this prison has always been horrid. In our 2017 report called In Prison Justice Inside 2 Georgia Immigrant Detention Centers, Project South and partners found evidence of sexual abuse, inadequate medical care, lack of prenatal care for pregnant women, lack of clean drinking water, and rampant use of solitary confinement at this prison. Those who have spoken out about the abuses over the years have consistently faced retaliation. So for example, a group of women in last year around this time came together and produced a video about their fears of catching COVID. And instead of providing them the protection that they needed, the guards went ahead and placed them in solitary confinement, which caused grave emotional damage for the women. We submitted a complaint to the Department of Homeland Security Office of Inspector General, along with partners in September, as I had mentioned. You know, in addition to the issue of forced sterilizations, we also talked about the various violations and lack of protection around COVID. So, for example, medical staff at the prison were deliberately not testing detained immigrants for COVID-19, even they were symptomatic, had pre-existing conditions, or had requested to be tested multiple times spanning a month. And the management deliberately lying to both detained immigrants and employees about how many COVID cases there were at the prison. So the shocking revelations about medical abuse against women's bodies at this prison further highlight the extent of the egregious abuses at Irving, and the fact that Black and brown immigrant women have been held in an extremely vulnerable position at this prison, where they have no control over their bodies and no say about what is done to them, is sickening. So we are glad that our complaint opened the door to more women coming forward with accounts of what was done to them. In total, more than 40 women filed sworn testimony in court as part of a class action lawsuit that we are co-counsel on, despite consistent attempts by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, to silence them. It pains me to know that there could be many more women out there who will never be able to talk about what happened to them and the abuse that they suffered while at Irving, let alone receive a measure of redress, while living with the lifelong damage to their bodies and spirits. Not surprisingly, ICE has not been forthcoming with information. Rather, they've been actively trying to cover their own tracks through deporting survivors and witnesses to medical abuse. And if it was not because of the documentation work happening and the advocates and lawyers' efforts to track down and reach out to women all over the world and courage of the impacted women, none of this would have ever come to light. So we know that ICE already deported 6 survivors and was trying to deport several more before lawyers and members of Congress stepped in and put a stop to the deportations. They also have used other tactics of retaliation against those who speak out, such as threats of placing women in solitary or actually subjecting them to solitary confinement. So in our class action lawsuit, we include evidence showing that ICE and private contractors at the prison, because this is a corporate-run prison, they knew as far back as 2018 about the medical abuse being inflicted on the women, and yet they did nothing. Instead, they kept sending women to the same doctor. Given what we have learned about the systematic violence against immigrants' bodies at Irving, we need ICE to come clean about what is happening at ICE prisons nationwide. Immigrants cannot have their bodily integrity at the mercy of ICE and the private prison corporations that the agency contracts with. I would say the vast majority of immigrants currently in detention are held in prisons run by private prison corporations. And that is why we have filed a Freedom of Information Act request to obtain information about gynecological procedures at ICE prisons nationwide. Not surprisingly, ICE did not provide us with any information, so we had to file a lawsuit. And pursuant to the class action lawsuit, all known survivors of medical abuse at Irving have now been released. I'm also happy to report that as of a couple days ago, all women at Irving have been released or transferred to other facilities. So there are currently no women at the Irving County Detention Center. However, women are now transferred to the Stewart Detention Center, another detention center in Georgia, which is a deadly corporate-run prison with a forced labor program and a documented record of other egregious human rights violations. This is an extremely troubling development and a clear attempt by ICE to deflect attention from abuses at Irving. There have been 8 deaths at Stewart since May 2017, 2 of them by suicide under very similar conditions where people with mental health and emotional health issues were placed in solitary confinement for many days instead of providing the care that they needed, being provided the care that they needed. And 4 of the deaths were during the pandemic, which makes Stewart the deadliest ICE prison during the pandemic at least. So in terms of what we need for accountability, and I'm getting ready to wrap up because I know we don't have much time. So the scrutiny must not stop with examining the actions of one individual. This is about ICE and the private prison corporation, LaSalle, and the other prison corporations. Both Irving and Stewart must be shut down immediately and people should be freed. And the egregious retaliation against those who speak out must end. The women who suffered medical abuse must receive redress for the harm that they suffered. And the US government, as well as the private prison corporation running these prisons, must be held accountable. So we are determined to push ahead by pursuing a thorough congressional investigation, DHS, Office of Inspector General investigation, and we have also gone to the United Nations and the Inter-American Commission to expose the human rights violations. And of course, in terms of the bigger picture, we need to shut down all of these prisons. As a first step, the Biden administration must mandate that ICE stop dealing with private prison corporations, the same mandate that they issued to the Department of Justice. We cannot entrust the care of human beings to private prison corporations as their main interest is maximizing profit. And in terms of action that you all can take to support, please contact Congress. We need an investigation of ICE and the prison corporations. Again, we need to shut this place down to ensure that women do not face any retaliation. And please do join local grassroots social justice organizations and see what type of support that they need. Please see if you can provide any support in any form, whether it be volunteer work or otherwise. And I would like to leave you with this quote from freedom fighter Fannie Lou Hamer. Nobody is free until everybody is free. Thank you very much, and I look forward to answering questions in the remaining 4 minutes that we have.
Wow. incredible presentation. Thank you so much for bringing all this information to light. Part of the problem is that people don't know what's going on in these prisons, and they don't know that they're private. So thank you for bringing that to light, talking about it and helping these people. You're truly a warrior, and so proud of you. Thank you. We don't appear to have any questions. You guys really don't have any questions? All right, well then maybe we can just finish up early, unless, Hushia, do you have anything to add? Hushia, do you have anything more to add? No?
I think he's muted, so the administrator needs to unmute him.
Okay. Well, I think we'll wrap up. There don't appear to be any questions.
I can say something.
Okay.
Well, just a reminder, as Shay said in the beginning, if you would like to ask a question, please type your question. Maybe you didn't notice this. Please type your question in the chat. Shay, if you don't mind, maybe give people like a couple minutes. Maybe they start.
Okay. We do have one.
Okay.
I think it's, yes, for Azadeh, I think. Has there been any change in the abuses of ICE since the change in administration?
Well, not noticeably. I mean, you know, we are actually disappointed in the Biden administration in regards to treatment of immigrants in detention in particular. You know, one easy thing for them to have done would be to go ahead and shut down the Irving County Detention Center in light of all the abuses that we have documented, all the concern that it has raised across the world. And yet they did not do that. And that's truly deplorable. And, you know, people continue to be detained in prisons that are run by private prison corporations. And people continue to die. And that's, you know, a grave concern. So, you know, we need action. We can't wait. And so I think part of the problem is, people, you know, a lot of people might feel that, okay, well, there's a Democrat in office, you know, things are better. And, you know, people perhaps are not paying as much attention to the human rights situation, and to the violations, that are happening. And that's a mistake. You know, we cannot afford to be complacent. We have to pay attention to what is happening and hold the administration accountable, because this is no time for rest, that's for sure.
Yeah.
May I add one point? What Azadeh said is absolutely on the money, because every time in history that you have just trusted an administration, then I'm sorry, but you have been betrayed. So from that perspective, it happened after Reconstruction. It happened after the Civil Rights Movement. All the white liberals abandoned Martin Luther King the minute he was against the war. And then you had Clinton, who actually did the 1994 Crime Act, right? That crime bill that caused intensified and exacerbated the mass incarceration. That what Azadeh is talking about, private prisons becoming an entity, happened during mass incarceration, right? When you have less than 5% of the world population, over 21% of the world prisoners, including all the immigrants. So remember the 14th Amendment protection clause that applies to quote unquote illegal immigrants. So having said that, I really encourage everyone to, it's good that Mr. Biden removed the Muslim ban, but last week, he refused to increase the 10,000 annual allowance for refugees to 60,000. The United States is the most powerful economically and militarily power in the world, and we take 10,000 refugees. Unfortunately, a lot of policies has caused all millions of refugees. Even 75,000 is nothing. So anyways, those are unfortunately some warning signs, and we should all be aware. And remember, FDR, who sent all those people to the camps, was a Democrat.
Thank you. We do have a couple of more questions. There is one for you, Hushia, but I might be able to answer this a little bit better because I do criminal defense work on behalf of people who are don't have full citizenship yet. There's a question that asks, what are crimes that can cause taking back citizenship? Hushia, do you?
Oh, you go ahead. You go ahead. You're the attorney. You're the expert.
Well, I mean, I'm not the expert, but I've you know, it's been a collateral issue in some of my cases. You can't take back citizenship, but if you are a legal permanent resident or illegal, temporary status or whatever, that can be taken away from you. And you could be prevented from ever attaining citizenship and even deported. So crimes for which you can lose your permanent residence are generally felonies. But the way that felonies are defined in the Immigration Act doesn't always equate with how they're defined in crime. So that lesser things like, you know, crimes of dishonesty that might be misdemeanors might be defined as felonies under the Immigration Act for purposes of deportation. So there are crimes of moral turpitude that you really have to worry about, like crimes, you know, lying to officials or, I don't know, getting assistance because of your untruthfulness on your application, you know, a ton of stuff that it gets very complicated. And so wherever that's an issue, an attorney is definitely required. Okay, so the next question is, what is the status of the Biden pledge to get rid of private prison systems? Azadeh.
So as I mentioned during my talk, Biden issued a directive to the Department of Justice not to enter into contracts or not to renew contracts with private prison corporations, and that was great. But remember that what we have been talking about, ICE prisons, you know, this directive does not apply to, right? So, you know, immigrants that I was just talking about, they're in the custody of ICE. And the directive that Biden issued, that was only for purposes of the Department of Justice and prisons that fall under the purview of the Department of Justice, not ICE. So what we need to see is for Biden to broaden that directive so that it would also encompass prisons that are run by ICE. And we are up against a very powerful lobby, which is the private prison corporations that have a lot of money to give to politicians, and there lies the issue.
Okay. Let's see. I think we had this one before. Has there been any change in the abuses? Yeah, you answered that one. Okay, there is a comment. Oh, I see. Okay. Well, we're through with all of the questions. If there aren't any more, I think we can wrap it up. So thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This has been just fascinating and so incredible. I feel really proud of our community. The last hour has made me so proud. Thank you all, and hope you enjoyed it, and take care. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.